Welcome to this Venus Alchemy presentation on Venus retrograde and the alchemical goddess. I'm Kaylin Castell here with Tammy Brunk, and this is one of our favorite subjects to talk about when Venus is retrograde because it's in such a magical, amazing time of the Venus cycle. Do you want to let us know what it is we're going to cover, Tammy?
Yeah, this is really a potent and magical time. And what we're going to cover today is just kind of the facts of how Venus retrograde works, other views of Venus retrograde, and Venus alchemy's view of Venus retrograde, which is derived from the shamanic astrology perspective. And then what is Venus retrograde? How does it actually operate? Evening star retrograde, and then when Venus is is traveling between the Earth and the Sun. That is the metamorphic underworld period of the retrograde, and then morning star, and then number magic of Venus. So we're going to explore all of these topics.
I love this because a lot of people who look at Venus retrograde just look at Venus the time she goes retrograde to the time she goes direct, and there's a whole look at that, and we're going to see what the more traditional ways of looking at that are. But what we're looking at is there's an evening star phase of the Venus retrograde. There's a metamorphic underworld where you don't see Venus. She's gone for 7 or 8 days. And then there's a morning star phase. And they all have different meaning. And it's really exciting to kind of share this with you. And so I guess I've sort of talked about this a little bit already, but Venus is retrograde for about 40 days, about 16 days in the evening sky, about 16 days in the morning sky. That equals 32 days. Now, this isn't always the case because I think in some recent retrogrades we've had, Venus was retrograde for 43 days or was retrograde for 39 days. But anyway, the average is about 40 days. So that's why it's considered that. And then about 8 days in the underworld. So anything more we should say about that, Tammy?
No, I mean, I think we'll talk later about the significance of the 40 days, right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we can mention something about that now because there's a lot of number magic that is connected with Venus. So, you know, there are 5 Venus cycles every 8 years. 5 times 8 is 40. Venus is retrograde for 40 days. There's the 40 days and 40 nights of things that have happened from a biblical perspective. So 40 does seem to have a lot of significance in the cycle. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
So the framework that we're using, if you're not familiar with Venus alchemy in our work, is that we are working with the Sumerian tale of Inanna as the guiding story, as the guiding paradigm for the Venus cycle, which is really potent for our time because, of course, we live in a time where, in a sense, humanity is in a larger cultural descent and rebirth process. So this is part of why Inanna is our guiding feminine energy that we're working with. So in our mission with Venus alchemy is to recreate this incredible 19-month synodic cycle of Venus as a ceremonial initiatory rite of passage. And again, it's guided by the Sumerian myth of the goddess Inanna in her journey to the underworld, which is a potent teaching story that's used now all across in many contexts as kind of an initiatory rite. This cosmological explanation of how the Venus cycle works also provides us a ceremonial framework. Here the focus is on how to work with Venus retrograde as we understand the transition through the story of Inanna. So we're really using, again, this deeper story to help us understand, lean into, and activate ceremonially the retrograde Venus cycle. So Venus alchemy offers a way to engage the Venus initiation both personally and collectively.
Yay for us. Right? So we thought we'd also just share some other views of Venus retrograde. Some people watching this may be very aware of what these views are, and that we have, we're not saying these views aren't accurate or true, but they're somewhat limited in their perspective, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But essentially what you find is most astrologers will talk about how Venus is about social and lovely relationships, including marriage, friendships, family, whatever that's about, beauty, money, financial security, what is valued. It's also during Venus retrograde when these things are considered to be more challenging to engage. So, because the energy slows down and then it turns in on itself, and then Venus is diminished in her power. Although we're going to see that what really is happening in the sky is perhaps opposite of what this more traditional way of looking at it has been. So the conventional understanding of Venus retrograde is don't start a love affair, don't move in with someone, don't get married during Venus retrograde. There can be hidden undercurrents in relationships that surface during Venus retrograde, and it might feel intense. Maybe you might even feel bitchy, irritable, angry, frustrated, whatever. Maybe things that you've been repressing and denying in relationships would come up at that time. You might feel more fragile and vulnerable. You might feel hidden, repressed, minimized. You might find it difficult to use the energy consciously. And then there's also this whole thing about this financial aspect of Venus. So they are saying that it's not a good time when Venus is retrograde to, invest in something or do a major financial undertaking, buy a house, whatever it might be, start a business. Although it can be a time to create a financial plan, it's not, and a budget, but it's not a good time to necessarily invest in something. And this is, again, from a traditional point of view about Venus retrograde. Also, it's considered not a good time to remodel or renovate or get a new wardrobe or do cosmetic surgery or change your appearance, like get a new hairstyle. And parties and social events aren't advised either. So this is because of the perspective that Venus is primarily about social relationships. So Tammy, did you want to share something more about that?
Yeah, just that, I've seen in my experience and in others that sometimes it can very much be about personal relationship, but with other humans. As Kaylin's saying, it's not that we're saying that that can't be part of it, but I think one of the contributions of Venus alchemy and shamanic astrology is that it takes us beyond more mundane astrology. And in this case, it's not just about human to human relationships and the nuts and bolts of that. Because if we are just focused on that, we're missing the bigger picture. We're missing a wiser, deeper perspective. So from my perspective, Venus does actually, it's the feminine principle. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But with that, the feminine principle can be seen as a larger force in this age of forgetfulness and of disconnection that we're coming from. We're coming from more of a patriarchal era, which is a time of disconnection. The way I've been seeing Venus is that she actually is that force. The feminine is the force that helps us reconnect what's been fragmented and disconnected. So from that larger perspective, she's very much about relationship and reconnection and fostering those bonds. But that does not mean that that's all Venus is about. And it doesn't mean that every sign of Venus is all about personal bonds and partnership, because it's not.
Exactly, because it might be more about the relationship with consciousness, or the relationship with a sacred work, or the relationship with nature and the earth and that kind of thing, than it is with a human being, right? So
more about restoring the connection with Gaia, and that person might not really be that much into the pair bond,
right?
So in that case, it's not really applying.
Right. I mean, I think about, I'm Venus and Aries, so I think about the relationship to my noble cause and mission. And that might not include other people. It might. We don't know. But the main thing is that it feels like it's a noble cause. And currently, my noble cause is furthering understanding of Venus in new ways that include a larger context than what has been out there in a more traditional view of how we look at Venus. So
limit the goddess.
Yeah, exactly, right? So this is also a time that is suggested from a more mainstream point of view, or traditional or mundane, a different point of view, like how Venus is seen in the probably in the greater collective reality. Is this might be a time when it's good to make amends in your relationships. It might be a good time to end relationships that aren't healthy for you, right? Because it's not a time to start relationships, but it might be a time it's like, oh, this relationship not working, time to get out of it. Cleaning up clutter, turning what you're not using into cash, giving it away, whatever works for you to create a better relationship with the space around you, I suppose, is what that's talking about. And then thinking about what you want to redecorate, but of course, wait until Venus is direct to actually do it. And then again, this idea of making a financial plan that might include getting out of debt or increasing your savings or both, depending on whatever your situation is, are good things to do, plan for during Venus retrograde, according to this point of view, but not to necessarily implement until Venus goes direct.
Beautiful. But the way that we look at this is that some of those things you can take into account, and some we don't necessarily operate within that framework. Like, for example, we don't, like Kaylin said, we don't think that Venus is diminished in this phase. Venus is viewed as the primary archetype of the divine feminine in all of her expressions, which is about much more than just human to human love. For women, Venus represents the intended feminine expression. For men, Venus represents the inner feminine, inner beloved, or inner other. And she is at her greatest strength and power, closest to the earth and brightest when retrograde, which again is different. That is different than the traditional perspective. Or we shouldn't say traditional, actually.
Right.
More mainstream or conventional, like what's happening now with astrology. What the current conversation is dominantly is that she's in her, right, what would you say? She's diminished?
She's diminished. She's not as strong. She's, yeah, there's debilitated. There's lots of words that are thrown around about how Venus is when she's retrograde.
Right. But one of the beautiful things about shamanic astrology is that we're really paying attention to what's happening in the sky and how you see that and connect to that and with the living sky. And so the reality is that she's at her greatest strength and power because she's at the closest to the earth, and she's brightest when she's retrograde. So from that perspective, there's a lot of potency to tap into. So she's not diminished, but she's quite stunning to see in the sky. And of course, she is close. She's with the sun for a short period of time that we've talked about before, around 8 days average, but could be less or more. But beyond that, when she rises as morning star and when she's an evening star before that, she's quite bright. She's quite stunning. So Venus conjunct the sun represents a metamorphic transformation from one meta goddess to another. And so, if you remember in the Inanna story, it connects to that. And when you work with us more deeply with the cycle, you'll learn more about that. So Venus begins a new cycle at Helaical rise, and as morning star retrograde, she is morphed from one expression of the divine feminine to a new expression.
Indeed. And just something that, as we're filming this video, is that, of course, we're doing it during a Venus retrograde. And I was just outside last night looking up at the sky. She is so bright. She is like a spotlight in the sky. She's in the evening sky. She always goes retrograde in the evening sky, and then she'll shift to the morning sky. And so if you are watching this video, you might very likely be watching it during a Venus retrograde. And if she's still in the evening sky, worth so much. Just go out and see her. She's just so amazing. And then if she's in the morning sky, you have to get up early, go out and see her. But she's also really bright and amazing to see there as well. And one of the things is when we can really have that more visual connection, we get more personal information from that experience. So what we would suggest are ways to work with the Venus retrograde is to really take time to review the meta goddess initiation of the last year and a half. And so there are at least 5 different possibilities of what that meta goddess might be. If it's a Capricorn cycle, then this might be reviewing how you've been able to take greater responsibility, to show up, to be somebody who is handling and doing things and taking things into new ways of doing it that are more effective and efficient. Get better results, Capricorn kind of things. Or if it's a Leo, maybe you've been learning how to love yourself better. Or if it's Aries, maybe you've been tuning into what your mission, your purpose is. If it's been Libra, then maybe you've been learning about relationships. There's the relationship thing. And if it's Gemini, perhaps you're learning how to be more playful and fun and learn how to be more creative and not take things so seriously. Anything you want to add to any of those
No, that's a wonderful synopsis.
Okay, great. So, and then, you know, like look at the challenges you might have had with those ideas or that way, and what are the gifts that have come for you around that. So you might ask yourself how you've deepened your own relationship with your emerging feminine identity if you're a woman, and your inner other, your feminine inner other if you're a man. So another good thing that you can do during this time, because it is an integration, synthesis, and preparation for something new coming in. So you might want to create an intention for completion with the cycle that has been going on, that has been happening. Or you might want to, and then you might want to create an intention for moving forward into whatever the new cycle is about. And of course, this is something we talk about in great depth in our classes when we're, you know, encouraging people to work with the Venus cycle and how to create intentions and altars and do ceremony and all of that. So, and Tammy, you want to do the last one? Because this is one that you shared.
Sure. But for me, the slide hasn't changed.
Oh, it doesn't say consider, explore when you don't
sorry. Okay, I thought you meant the next slide.
Okay.
Yes. Also, you may, again, this is exactly what Kaylin is saying. Consider exploring one to three specific examples of how you've embodied the current meta goddess for women, or how she's become a part of you for men. So again, this can be very helpful. And in our courses, we always have a Venus journal that we recommend people keep. And we found sometimes when you're really specific in this way, you might just take 20 minutes to say, okay, what is a specific example in my life? So I'm just coming out of the Capricorn cycle, for example, and I really got my website going in a way that works for me. You know, point. Like it could be that simple. But just to really consider and make it tangible can be helpful to really look at that and anchor that into the present moment.
Right. I would just say, like, an Aries example. I figured out my mission, my purpose. I am on it. I am 100% committed to it. And then
Right.
you can write about more about what that is and how you're going to take action steps to further that mission, that cause, that purpose. Right.
Definitely.
Those are just some examples of how you might work with that at this time, because it helps to, once, if we write about it, if we talk about it, if we, you know, somehow bring it into greater conscious awareness and commit to it more fully, then we benefit in amazing, life-changing ways.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So Venus stations retrograde in the evening sky and remains visible in the evening sky for about 16 days. And this is the completion and integration of the current initiation cycle while we're preparing for a new incarnation. So evening star Venus retrograde is a time of reflection, integration, and preparation to die a good death. It is, you know, so this is the part where if you talk about it being diminished, you know, maybe there's some resonance in the level that this is a completion phase. And so, yes, there might be things you're letting go of. There might be a profound shift that's happening for you. So, you know, this is, so for example, again, if you're in the end of the Aries cycle, you might be really, again, asking, you're moving from Aries. So in that case, it would be moving from Aries to, in the last case, you know, to the Libra cycle as we're doing this video. And so you're asking, in a sense, what is it that I'm needing to, you know, how am I going to reflect on all the ways that I've integrated Aries and becoming, you know, really strong in my cause and mission, and preparing to die a death so that you can then emerge into this new cycle.
Right. And it is totally something to just keep in mind, is that it is a symbolic death because
Right.
it's, you're going to still take with you everything you've gained from the previous cycle, all the gifts, all the challenges and changes and, you know, amazing metamorphosis and whatever's gone on for you, but the focus is going to shift. So a new goddess is coming onto the world stage. It's going to be prominent. And so that's something to keep in mind as well. And so you might want to reflect on what's happened to you. We've already said this, but you could express gratitude for everything you've learned. You could celebrate all the ways you've grown, and celebration is such a high vibration. So it's really fun to do that. Like, oh, wow, I got this skill. Or as Tammy was saying something about if it was like the Capricorn cycle and you got your website going, right? Or you found new ways of loving yourself, and say it was in the Leo cycle, then celebrate that and really take the time to integrate and feel into what those gifts are that you've received. And then you're also preparing to surrender your old identity so you can be reborn to a new one. And then you might ask yourself, what aspect of myself or identity is ready to change, or what am I ready to let go of altogether? Because this is the time of integration, but also preparation towards what's next.
You know, just to say with what you're saying, that I think sometimes it can be useful to, and we also do this in our classes, to ask the larger question, you know, about what am I letting go of? What have I integrated? Relate that to the archetype of the meta goddess that you're coming, of the cycle you're coming out of, but also to ask it in a bigger sense, you know, to do a both and. Make it specific to the Libra or the Aries archetype or whatever, but also just ask that larger question of what I've integrated and what I'm ready to let go of and what I'm ready to die to. Sometimes it's beneficial because then you're casting a wider net to integrate something that might be beyond our perception with our understanding of the archetype.
Indeed.
So in the metamorphic underworld, this is the phase that I think Kaylin and I both are kind of also really in love with because it's just such a mysterious and a potent phase. And in this phase, Venus passes between the Earth and the Sun, disappearing into the metamorphic underworld, no longer visible as evening star and not yet visible as morning star. And this is where the alchemical goddess, this is what we call the goddess who's crossing the threshold, she undergoes a complete death to her old identity, preparing to be reborn in a new incarnation of the goddess. So in June of 2004 and 2012, Venus transited the face of the sun in this phase of her cycle. So she'll always be, yeah, so that's such a sweet little image there. Now in most cycles, Venus will be, from our perception, would be below or above that sun, so we would not see her. But in those rare occasions, almost like a little eclipse, she will be visible on the face of the sun. It won't be, it'll be 21, 25 before this happens again. So this is, again, just to understand the metamorphic underworld. If you're, for example, coming out of the Venus and Aries cycle and moving into the Venus and Libra cycle, it's the Venus and Aries goddess that is dying, and then she's being reborn as the Libra meta goddess.
And just something else to know about this, because the sun is the source. We see it as the source of life and light for our planet. So without the sun, in the relationship we have to planet Earth, we would not be here. So when planets are with the sun, they're sourcing something new. And that's why there's that idea of this sort of metamorphic transformational change. And especially when Venus is between the sun and the Earth, because she's also with the sun in another part of the cycle that is not a metamorphic death and rebirth. It's a different kind of death and rebirth, that just to have an awareness of that. And that the getting to witness the Venus transit over the sun in 2012 was so fantastic, because it's once in a lifetime, or sometimes maybe even a few lifetimes possibility. But that really shows us how Venus is really between the Earth and the sun, because you cannot see Venus on the sun unless she's retrograde between the Earth and the sun and so close to the Earth as a result. And the other Venus-Sun conjunction is on the other side of the sun. So it takes her a long time to go through that underworld phase. So the metamorphic underworld, retrograde Venus with the sun, really represents a quantum leap. So you want to do this, Tammy?
Sure. I just wanted to also say that, just for people who don't know, that we refer to that period, which some would say is the inferior conjunction, or the interior conjunction is how we say it, when it's the sun between, it's Venus between the Earth and the sun. That's a very short thing. We call that the metamorphic underworld phase. But then in part of the cycle, Venus will also be, from our perspective, it's the exterior conjunction, which is kind of behind the sun from our view. So that's much longer. We refer to that as the Inanna underworld phase, just so you kind of get that bigger picture.
Yeah, and we will literally have an image of that later. that probably maybe should have been sooner, but it's later. So it's what it
Oh, looks okay. Great.
right.
All right. But in the metamorphic underworld, retrograde Venus with the sun is taking a quantum leap. This is how we see it. And the alchemy of this time is intended as a profound quantum leap in the alchemy of your personal and collective consciousness. It's a time for prayer, for meditation, sacred ceremonies to assist you in opening to new states of awareness while embracing new timelines that represent the reality you most deeply desire to experience for yourself. So how do you want to feel at every level of your life? Engage practices that help you truly feel your desired new reality with all of your senses. Shift your vibration through engaging practices that help you align with the timeline you most desire. Take action as if this reality is already what you are experiencing. So this is a time where anything's possible.
Right. It's a way to anchor in whatever that, sourcing of a new reality, new ideas, new ways of looking at things, new experience, new feeling, new whatever it might be that you're having when Venus is retrograde with the sun at this time. So you might have some questions you might ask yourself when Venus is in this metamorphic phase. What are the old identities that no longer serve that I'm releasing now? You might want to know what old identities are being transformed, and are you willing for them to be transformed? Maybe there are old identities you really like and you're not ready for that, so that's good to be aware of that. So and then what areas of your life are you experiencing a birth into a new identity? That's kind of cool, because sometimes people, we can go through an identity change. Literally, I just went through a little bit of an identity change myself because I had my first grandbaby. So now I'm a grandma. And when I had my first child, I went from being just, whoever to a mom. So, we have identity changes all the time. Maybe we go into a relationship, so then we have an identity that we're adding to our identity as a partner, as in a relationship, something like that. So there's lots of different ways we can have an identity change. So what areas of life would you like to experience a total metamorphosis? To have just to be the caterpillar who becomes the butterfly and emerges out of the cocoon. And what would it take for you to embrace this transformative metamorphosis occurring at this time? And because sometimes we're resistant, sometimes we're, not wanting to go there, or we're not aware that how amazing it's going to be to be a butterfly as opposed to be a caterpillar. Because, butterflies can be more. It
strikes me as you're speaking, Kaylin, that so much of this we're speaking to, it looks simple, and it's the most challenging thing.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah, just let go and let your identity change. Just surrender it. It's like no big deal. No, I mean, people kicking and screaming, most of us, because we get really comfortable and attached, and it's just easier.
Right. So, sometimes it has to become so uncomfortable that we're willing to let it go. And I've literally had that experience a few times.
Yeah, that's kind of probably true of most of us. But if we're aware of it and we can kind of try to actively loosen it, ask for support in it, go into ceremony and prayer and just have that awareness, it can help. So the next phase is within the Venus retrograde is the morning star rise. So Venus rises as morning star following the metamorphic underworld time, incarnating as a new goddess based on the archetypal sign she occupies at the time of her heliacal rise. So she's retrograde for about 16 days in the morning sky before stationing direct. And ancient cultures across the globe viewed this rise of Venus as a really potent time. It's a time of great power. And they would use that as a time to go to war or do ritual sacrifice. So today we have new ways of connecting with the sacred timing as an active celebration of the goddess preparing for a powerful initiatory journey. So we honor that this clearly is a time with a lot of potency and power, and we can choose how we energize it.
Right, because we don't want to do the old ways some of the old cultures did. Right. So the morning star retrograde descent, so basically is that time of preparation for the spiritual initiation of taking the descent into the underworld to go through this process, to be willing to go through a death and rebirth process. So this is a time to strategize, to create a plan, maybe prepare how you're going to go through the next few months. It's usually 7 to 8 months after Venus goes direct that that Venus is in the morning sky, going through the process of descent into the underworld, something that we cover much more deeply in our Venus Signature series. And then this is a time for gathering your inner forces, for engaging daily practices of meditation, being in nature, chanting, singing, drumming, dancing, whatever it is that helps you get connected and feel like you're preparing for what's to come, so that you're building your personal strength and you're getting clear on what you need for whatever may be next. So you might ask yourself, what would it feel like? What would it take to be and to feel prepared for the upcoming initiation, descending into the underworld where you will die to who you believe yourself to be so you can be reborn to who you truly are. And that really is the essence of this journey, is letting go of all the false identities and all the false ways of being that are holding us back from being our true self. I wonder, I probably should talk about this. Because this is, you can see the 5-pointed star here and the pentagram, and then essentially this is what Venus creates in the sky. And so every 18 to 19 months, there's a new Venus rising in the sky, and how she does this is creating this 5-pointed star. And then in the 5-pointed star, we could say that there's this golden triangle that shows up within the star, and the numbers 72 and 36 are very much connected to this, and we're going to see how this is connected to the Venus cycle. Also, there's an Enneagram that we're going to see a little bit more about in a minute. But, so 5 Venus cycles every 8 years. Venus goes around the sun 13 times in that 8 years. And this is part of the number magic of Venus, of the Fibonacci sequence of 5, 8, and 13. And
so I just want to add something, Kaylin, when you're speaking to these numbers, I just want to say that when I first started learning this from Kaylin years ago, not just the numbers, but the Venus alchemy cycle, I think sometimes that the technical aspect and the numbers magic and those aspects of it it was a little difficult for me because I'm very right-brained. And what I came to recognize is that every time you talk about that, Kaylin, it's like we need, as women and as men connected to the feminine, to connect to the left side, the left brain of the goddess as much as the right brain. So we're needing to go back and forth. And so every time you connect to those a little bit more esoteric, but the number magic like that, you're actually opening certain portals in our consciousness and also helping our minds to learn to operate in left as well as right brain. Just wanted to honor that.
Beautiful, thank you. Yeah, and you can do this one.
Okay. So additional facts about Venus retrograde: morning star Venus and 36 days. Venus reaches maximum brightness 36 days after the interior conjunction with the sun, and maximum elongation occurs 36 days after maximum brightness. Exterior conjunction occurs 216 days, or 6 times 36 days after maximum elongation. And again, exterior conjunction is when Venus is on the other side of the sun from our perspective. So, and then evening star Venus in 36 days, Venus reaches maximum elongation 216 days after the exterior conjunction with the sun, maximum brightness 36 days later following maximum elongation, and the interior conjunction of Venus and the sun is 36 days later. So if you see those patterns.
The point is not that you necessarily need to remember that exactly, but there is a very precise, mathematical, amazing, magical thing that's happening with Venus that, and it's not always precisely that number of days, but it's so much the average and is part of how this number magic is connecting in with the cycle. So now we're going to see how 36 days of, the 36 piece connects to Shekinah and Venus. And there was a guy, I think he was a Christian mystic, a German philosopher. He was a Lutheran Protestant theologian, and he wrote this thing, and there's a link here that you'll be able to access, called the
Nature of all things.
pardon?
The signature of all things?
The signature of all things. Thank you. Right, I was just forgetting that for a second. Okay, so, and he thought that the number 36 was with the angelic world. So because if you take the first 8 numbers and add them up, they add up to 36. And he also saw that as the number of the sky. So if you want to, take that deep dive, if you're interested in those kinds of things, you can see what he wrote and literally lived in, the late 1500s, early 1600s. So this was a while back, but he was basing this information on what he was seeing personally and also what he was seeing from the people that came before him. And then the Hebrew letters, they also connect in with this 36. And basically the Talmud says every generation has 36 righteous ones who are to greet the Shekinah, or the divine presence, the divine feminine presence, when she rises into the sky, hence why Venus and Shekinah are connected. And so this is, and Jacob Boehm wrote about this also, saying that Venus represented love of life and spiritual rebirth, not just relationship. Interesting. And so, and also then there's this whole thing about 30 and 40, and even, I mean, literally looking at the biblical story of Adam and Eve is the one who essentially chooses to experience death, because they're not supposed to eat from the tree of good and evil, but, the fruit of good and evil. But it's that opportunity to have a different experience, and she chooses it, not unlike Venus, who chooses to make the descent into the underworld and go through the initiation. Kind of interesting, because mostly we see Eve as the reason for all our problems. So maybe we can shift that. So in the Apocalypse of Moses, the life of Adam and Eve, they describe this, what happened to them after they were expelled from paradise, and that they decided to go into a deeper initiation. They called it penance, of course, but Eve chose to spend 36 days, Venus, in the Tiger River in silence, and Adam chose to spend 40 days in the Jordan River while fasting. So we have the 40 days of the Venus retrograde, and as a time of fasting, as a time of deep spiritual initiation, that sort of thing. And then the 36 days, the number 36 shows up again. So we're just going to do a little quick thing here. 369. This is the key to the universe. These numbers, 369. So 36 has the first 2 numbers within that. And we can see that 3 is the triangle, 6 is the hexagram, and 9 is the enneagram. And Nikola Tesla really saw this as the key to the universe and the path of manifestation. So if we know how to work with this. So just showing you this, just so that you can see, that there's a masculine triangle, there's a feminine triangle. When we put them together, we get the hexagram of that, bringing together the masculine and feminine energy. And of course, the 9 is the enneagram with a triangle in the center of it, which is kind of cool. So this number magic is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just so you know that this is, we're going to see how it relates in a moment to the Venus cycle. But it's also related to the Earth, because there's 360 degrees in the circle. There's the numbers on the compass, like 45 degrees, 90 degrees, 135, 180. All those numbers add up to 9. And there's 60 minutes in a clock, so 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day. 2 + 4 = 6. 3 × 6 = 18. And so 36 adds up to a 9, of course. And then there's the quarter points of the clock as well. So we have 3, 6, 9, and then 12, which is basically bringing it back to a 3. So this number magic is all across our world and our reality. And, seeing how the latitude and the longitude are connected to these numbers as well. So just so you see, here's the 5-pointed star, the Venus star at the center here. This is the crop circle that happened in 2010, looking at the sacred geometry, and basically showing you how these numbers in the circle, and they all add up to 9. So if you go from a blue point to a red point, it's 36. And if you go from a red point to another red point, it's 72 degrees that are in the circle around the Venus star. So now we're going to see why this is significant. So here's the Earth. Here's Venus when she's retrograde. She goes retrograde in the evening star. She passes between the sun and the Earth and rises as morning star. Or we could go this way because I think that's the way the arrows are going. And then when she gets close to the sun out here, she disappears behind the sun, far from the Earth. We don't see her for a long time, like anywhere from 60 to 90 days. And then she reappears in the evening sky. And I actually I always think of Venus as the evening sky over here and the morning sky over here. So, but this is, as Tammy was saying, that interior conjunction and the exterior conjunction, or as it's said in more traditional ways of looking at it, inferior and superior, but it kind of suggests that one is better than the other. So we really like to go with the interior because it describes where Venus is, and the exterior also. But you see that it's 72 days from evening sky to after its conjunction with the sun. Let's see. So the sun in its morning star appearance 72 days after its conjunction with the sun while retrograde, or when Venus is between the Earth and the sun. So when it's here, and then it goes to morning star station direct, it's like there's this 72-day piece that's happening. And so this is and also Venus is, the distance of Venus from the sun out in the sky is 0.72 of the Earth's distance from the sun. So these numbers just keep showing up over and over again. So this is pretty amazing, magical energy to be connected to. And, the precession of the equinoxes and how we know what time it is for us is in 1 degree every 72 years. Mm-hmm. So we are, I think, done with the Venus retrograde. And if you want to join us in our next journey, you can go to venusalchemy.com. If you don't know where your Venus is, and you can go to ALABE. You can check this link and go and get a free natal chart. And if you have any questions, you can email us at info@venusalchemy@gmail.com. So anything you want to say to close?
We hope to see you there and enjoy this Venus retrograde, and just really, hopefully you will have that time for ceremony and to work through some of these practices that we've given.
Beautiful. Yes. Good luck with your Venus retrograde time.